Okay. Welcome back to SaharaTV viewers. We are here with Eric Gutschuss, and he is a Nigeria researcher at Human Rights Watch. His work focuses on intercommunal violence in central Nigeria, the human rights aspects of police corruption, and extrajudicial killings by government security forces, as well as the menace that Boko Haram has presented to the state and attacks that they have carried out. He's previously worked in Guinea, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Rwanda. He holds a law degree from the University of California, Los Angeles. So, Eric, thank you so much for coming today to speak with us on the latest report by Human Rights Watch and the work that you're doing in Nigeria.
Thank you for having me today.
So, I guess to start out, if you could just give a bit of background. I mean, I read the bio, but if you could give a little bit of background about yourself and the work that you've been doing in Nigeria leading up to this most current report by Human Rights Watch.
Sure. I work as the Nigeria researcher at Human Rights Watch. I've been in this position since 2008, based in Washington, D.C., but I've traveled at this stage 18 times to Nigeria across the country, carrying out research and advocacy on a broad range of human rights issues. We have focused a lot on, in the past 8 years at Human Rights Watch, on the link between corruption and human rights, and also the problems of security force abuses and impunity, and looking as well at intercommunal violence within the Middle Belt region, and most recently the violence in northern and central Nigeria carried out by Boko Haram.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much. So can you provide a summary of some of the major findings with this latest report?
Sure. And just as a bit of background is that the report we carried out 3 research missions. There were two researchers from Human Rights Watch who conducted the research between July 2010, May 2012, and then again in July of this year. We interviewed more than 135 individuals, including 91 witnesses or victims of Boko Haram attacks or alleged abuses by government security forces. We also spoke with senior military and police officials and senior officials at the Ministry of Justice, as well as lawyers and civil society activists. In addition, we've been monitoring attacks by Boko Haram since 2009, and including statements made by the group that has helped us track in terms of suspected attacks by this group. And so let me just summarize real briefly. Since 2009, suspected members of the group and then the response when it comes to government security forces, more than 2,800 people have been killed in this violence. And of these, at least 1,500 people have died in attacks by suspected members of Boko Haram. We look at the violence generally in 2 stages. One was the 5 days of violence in July 2009, centered in Borno State, but also in Bauchi, Yobe, and Kano State. And then the group went underground for about a year, reemerged under the leadership of Abu Bakr Shakau, and then began this campaign that increased a campaign of violence, initially targeting police officers and then traditional leaders, and has since expanded across northern and central Nigeria. I want to just, summarize in terms of attacks by Boko Haram is that we've found that there have been kind of 3 main categories when it comes to attacks. One has been attacks on members of the security forces, and especially the police. Since 2009, there have been more than 60 police stations attacked in 10 northern and central Nigerian states. More than 211 police officers have been killed. And this year alone, some 119 police officers in the first 9 months have been killed, more than in 2010 and 2011 combined. Secondly, the group has carried out attacks on Christians across the north. Since 2010, more than 18 church services have been attacked by suspected members of the group, either in suicide, car bombings, or gun attacks, resulting in at least 107 deaths in these attacks. And then thirdly, the group has carried out attacks on Muslims who work for the government, who are alleged to have somehow cooperated or collaborated with the government, or have been critical of the group. If you look at since 2010, in Borno State alone, there have been more than a dozen Islamic clerics that have been gunned down by suspected members of this group. Been politicians and civil servants who've been assassinated. Last month, the Attorney General in Borno State was shot and killed by suspected members of the group, as well as gun attacks on mosques. In several cases where individuals have been gunned down during Friday prayers in mosques in northern Nigeria. So, these have generally been the three main categories of attack, but Boko Haram has also attacked the UN building in Abuja, carried out attacks on newspaper offices, schools, that burned down schools, as well as pubs, and carried out attacks on markets. So let me leave it in terms of that side. That was one side of the report. The second side is the response of the government security forces, including alleged abuses that have been carried out by the police and the military.
Right. Yeah, and of course there was a whole different side to that in the terms of, obviously not necessarily against the state, but then you pointed out that there have been extrajudicial killings, the lack of due process, as well as other abuses by security forces, either in attempts to carry out what they claim to be their duties or just in attempts of lawlessness really on their part. But I noticed one glaring thing was that following the December 2011 bombing of the church, for the next 6 months, Nigeria, or parts of Nigeria at least, were in a declared state of emergency. And your findings actually discovered that Boko Haram during these 6 months in 2012 carried out more attacks during, or at least were more successful than during all of 2010 and 11. And it's, was that just a failure really? Was the declaration just that, the declaration by the security forces, and was there a failure, or was Boko Haram more emboldened in the past because they felt like they were getting kind of noticed or were getting kind of like a direct challenge, and that's how they responded to it? I mean, why was the failure of the state to prevent such attacks covering, these 6 months?
Well, a couple things. Let me respond to that. Is that in northern cities that we have visited, that the military has been deployed across the north. There have been, soldiers and police are posted at churches. They're posted at government buildings,
right.
In an effort to provide protection to Nigeria's citizens. The state of emergency that was declared on December 31st of 2011 in parts of 4 states, in many ways, it was you could say more symbolic than it was significant in terms of the what it meant on the ground. In Maiduguri and in Damaturu, as well as in Jos, where the state of emergency was, and in Suleja in Niger State, the military was already on the ground. The military already had the JTF, Joint Military Task Force, already had the primary security responsibility. The government did issue regulations regarding the state of emergency in May of this year that provided that individuals can be detained by an order by essentially a designated authority, and then including various regulations about curfews, relocating individuals. But what we've found is that in places where there has been the state of emergency and not, for example, Kano, there was never a state of emergency declared, but the response of the security forces was very much the same. Individuals have been detained. They're not being brought before judges in Kano or in Maiduguri, and in many cases detained without charge or trial. So, the state of emergency was only for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, President Goodluck Jonathan did not renew the state of emergency. But I just wanted to come back to the initial kind of the premise of the question was when it comes to alleged abuses by members of security forces, we are deeply concerned about the number of cases in which members of the police and the military have allegedly carried out extrajudicial killings and other abuses within communities. We documented more than 50 cases of alleged extrajudicial killings by members of the security forces. And what we found is that many of these cases, especially since 2010, have been carried out by the military. In July 2009, a lot of these killings, which got a lot of publicity, took place at the police headquarters, where Mohammed Yusuf and at least several dozen of his or suspected, of his followers were executed by the police. But since 2010, what will often happen is there's an attack carried out in a community. Suspected Boko Haram members, the military then will respond and carry out a raid in that community. And at times, they have also, during those raids, carried out abuses, including burning homes and shops, taking out young men and executing them in front of their homes, rounding up individuals and then detaining them. And in many cases, the fate of these individuals is not clear, since they're not being brought, in most cases, they're not being brought before a judge and charges filed against them.
Right. Actually, there was just one this past week, and we were trying to get someone from the JTF to, talk to us about these alleged abuses that just occurred in Maiduguri, where there have been reports and documentation of upwards of 30 civilians being killed, as well as homes and, like you were saying, shops and cars burned, in response to what some say was an attack on a patrol of the JTF, and then in their response they went after kind of the surrounding neighborhood, if you will. So again, I guess obviously your report also documented that is not a one-time thing. I mean, it's been recurring frequently. And so I guess on that note, how, when it comes to the recommendations or overhauls of the security forces, like how drastic does it need to be so that the population can at least trust that, they don't fear when the security forces and police are in their neighborhoods or are coming down their streets as much, as they do now?
And these, Nigeria right now faces very serious security challenges, and especially in the north. And soldiers and police that are deployed to these areas are at significant risk given the number of attacks that have taken place. And I think the problem, when it comes to abuses by members of the security forces, is twofold. One is that they're a violation of Nigerian law and international human rights law, and that these are crimes that have been committed by members of security forces. And so the illegality of these alleged crimes are a huge concern. But going even beyond that is, even from a pragmatic standpoint, is that many countries, in terms of responding to threats by groups such as Boko Haram, in terms of carrying out, of ostracizing yourself from the community when going in and carrying out abuses or rounding up individuals and killing people in communities, is detrimental to the efforts of the Nigerian government to try to curtail this threat. At the end of the day, Boko Haram, if you look at the many statements by Boko Haram, they use the alleged abuses by members of security forces, and well-documented abuses by members of security forces, including the extrajudicial killing of Mohammed Yusuf, the late Boko Haram leader. There have been 5 police officers who have been arraigned for his killing. They have used these abuses to justify attacks on members of the security forces and to say why they're continuing to carry this out. So it's really important that the Nigerian government sends a clear message that if there have been and when there are human rights violations and abuses that have been carried out by the police and the military, that this is not accepted, and that the Nigerian authorities will investigate and hold accountable those who are responsible. Unfortunately, there have only been, as far as we can tell, and from our conversations with police and military and justice ministry officials, there's only been those 5 police officers, and this is a significant case. But apart from those 5 police officers, no other police have been prosecuted for alleged abuses. And as far as the military, there have been 5 soldiers that have been, or in the process of being, court-martialed for alleged abuses in July 2011 in Maiduguri. But apart from all of these other cases, there's been no one who has been held accountable. And so the message that is sent to the community is, again, this fear on both sides of Boko Haram and members of the security forces, and on both sides there hasn't been accountability.
Right. To go off of that in slightly a different way is, I guess, like how the recommendations as far as the Nigerian people are concerned. So I know, like, a lot of times Western NGOs and groups like Human Rights Watch are said to, or pointed out by the people as being interfering with what they consider to be like African issues, or just interfering with the African continent in general. That's part one. And then on top of that, I guess if you could address that, like, how do you get around that? And then on top of that, I know one of your recommendations when it concerned outside actors to the US and UK was to press Nigeria to fulfill obligations under international law regarding torture, treatment of detainees, and due process guarantees. Now, when it comes to some of, you could claim, the West's war on terror, you know, these countries like the US and UK haven't always held this up. So how is it that your report, do you get people to take it seriously when they can point and say, well, you know, where is your report against condemning the United States, for example, or other countries in the West that, you know, don't follow the same things that you're asking Nigeria to?
Yeah, and it seems like there's kind of two questions. I'll respond to the first. Yes. Is that it's Human Rights Watch. It's not alone in condemning, one is attacks by Boko Haram, and then secondly, abuses that have been carried out by members of the security forces. Mm-hmm. There's Nigerian civil society activists and leaders who are also speaking out against these crimes when they have been committed. You know, I think on the second end, I did find it very interesting when meeting with government officials, Nigerian government officials, and especially on the issue of detention of Boko Haram suspects without, in many cases, without charge or trial, and, you know, saying that very often bringing up Guantanamo Bay and saying, you know, we don't have a Guantanamo Bay. And I think that's one of the big challenges for the U.S. government, is that they are grappling with their own, what I would say, human rights failures when it comes to responding to the threat of terrorism and how to deal with this threat, and simply discarding due process rights and detaining people without charge. It undercuts their own moral authority when dealing with other countries. And so, we do work very often in terms of U.S. counterterrorism policies. But that having been said, they still have a role to play when it comes to putting pressure both publicly and privately on the Nigerian government to uphold human rights and strategies that are more effective. And the U.S. has been learning lessons along the way. The photos of torture and misconduct of detainees in Iraq in the Abu Ghraib prison was very detrimental to their efforts. And so the response, I mean, they've had to make clear is that this is conduct that is not acceptable, and so the Nigerian government as well needs to look long and hard at these abuses and how they potentially undermine their efforts to combat the threat of Boko Haram, which is a real threat to Nigeria's citizens right now.
Right. Thank you so much. We only have a few more seconds, so just quickly. So has the reaction to, on an official level and perhaps by Boko Haram, been positive or negative, or have you heard anything on the report as it's come out?
You're saying from Boko Haram?
From Boko Haram and from the Nigerian government? Just in a general sense, whether it's been...
Yeah, I think the twofold. We haven't heard anything from Boko Haram, and I think, quite frankly, they don't, in terms of, they see us probably as a secular... Right. Okay. Human rights organization that falls outside of, in terms of what their objectives are. So no, I mean, we haven't heard anything from Boko Haram. As far as the Nigerian government, they have voiced their very strong objections to to our report, and especially to the allegations of security force abuses. So these are issues that we will and hope to continue to dialogue and follow up with the Nigerian authorities regarding our report findings.
Okay. Well, Eric, thank you so much for being with us here today on Sahara TV and for sharing your report findings, and good luck with the recommendations and going forward from here.
Thank you for having us today.
Viewers, that was Eric Gutschuss from Human Rights Watch. He is the Nigeria researcher at Human Rights Watch, sharing his insights on a report released on Boko Haram and the security forces and abuses by both of those organizations that take place in Nigeria. Stay tuned, and coming up next, we're going to have Skype calls followed by a Sierra Leone musician in the studio.